welcome to this videocast for subscribers to davidicke.com. There's a line in a Shakespeare play called As You Like It, which talks about all the world being a stage. Men and women are the players making their exits and entrances, and there is a lot of truth in that on many levels. But probably none more so than politics. Because politicians are actors. There are some genuine ones, but most of them, especially those that get into any position of power, they're actors. They are saying what they don't believe for effect. They are lying to get people to accept things they wouldn't normally do if they'd have told the truth. And when you think about it, in a kind of way, acting is lying in the widest possible sense. Because you're not saying what you necessarily believe, you're reading from a script. And these actor politicians are reading from a script. The idea is not to tell the truth, it's to get what they want or what their masters in the shadows want by not telling the truth. And so we come this week to a classic example. David Cameron talking about putting forward demands to the European Union for reform on behalf of Britain, and if they don't comply, then he's even talking about pulling out of the European Union. David Cameron has absolutely no intention of pulling out of the European Union. It's all a hoax. It's all a game. It's all a farce. I've debated a few times at the Oxford Union, the ancient debating society at Oxford University. And when I first went, I was kind of shocked to realize that students who took part in the debate, and many of whom, that's why I'm mentioning it, go on to be politicians, that they were kind of drawing lots to decide if they were going to speak for the motion that night, for the proposal, or against it. And I had someone on my side who vehemently debated and passionately supported, it seemed, the motion that we were supporting. And afterwards I realized he didn't support it at all. He was just debating. It was his debating skills. And anyone who didn't know, who watched that performance, would have said, this guy passionately believes what he's saying. And that is how politics works. That's why I talk about actors. Some of them are very good actors, and some are actually appalling, like David Cameron and Tony Blair. Ironically, Blair was called the great actor-politician, that he could put on a performance. I don't think I've ever seen a politician that you could see through so clearly than him. If anyone wants an example, and by the way, if you're going to do this, I strongly recommend you have a sick bag available. You probably need it. Go on to YouTube and find Tony Blair's spontaneous speech, I love it, about the death of Princess Diana. And, well, like I say no more. You'll need a sick bag. It was an appalling piece of acting. But this is what these people are. They're actors. Which brings me back to Cameron. The reason that he has announced there will be a referendum to give the British people the opportunity to vote whether to stay in the European Union, fascist, bureaucratic, centralised state, or leave. 2017 is when it's supposed to happen, is because he was under pressure from both many people on his own side and the rise, certainly the rise at the time, of UKIP, the UK Independence Party, which is, of course, based on coming out of the European Union. And so he had a problem. And he wanted to clip the wings of UKIP by saying, yeah, I'm against all what's happening in the European Union as well. Yeah, there's too much bureaucracy, too much centralised control. And so we'll have a referendum and I'll put serious demands in if we don't get them and all that rubbish. There's no way he wants to come out of the European Union. And what has happened is that this week he has finally announced what his demands are. I said at the time that he announced it that what would happen is that he would put forward weak, mild demands to the European Union for reform. They would go, oh no, we can't deal with this. Oh yeah, tough negotiations. The mild changes will be negotiated to become even milder, and then he'll come out before the referendum and say, I've negotiated serious reforms in the European Union. I recommend we stay in. And that process is unfolding before our eyes. And it didn't take a genius to predict it, because anyone that looks at the story and knows the story knows that this is what's going on. The reason that there's no way he wants to come out is because he is a frontman, like all these here today, gone tomorrow politicians. Some are knowing frontmen, others are puppet frontmen. Well, they're all puppets in the end, but some know they're puppets and some don't. Cameron's a puppet who knows. And the reason that they don't want to come out of the European Union is because that which is controlling them, that which has brought them to power, that which tells them what to do from the shadows, has the European Union as part of a massive global structure of centralized Orwellian fascist control. And this structure, which I've been writing about for more than 2 decades, well over 2 decades now, and it's coming to light and coming to pass all the time, is for there to be a world government which would dictate to everyone on the planet. That world government would control a world central bank, a world single currency that would just be electronic, not cash. This is why we're hurtling towards the cashless society. Oh, look, I can pay my bill on the phone, isn't it great? Yeah, I guess tyranny and slavery is great if you look at it like that. Anyway, single currency, electronic, not cash, world central bank, world army to impose the will of the world government. And that's what NATO is becoming. And I predicted that years ago, way back into the 90s. I said in my books, watch for NATO operating outside of its designated area of the North Atlantic region. And that is what has happened. It's now in the Middle East. It's all over the bloody place. And what we're seeing with NATO and the international community, the G20, the G8, G7, whatever number they pick this year, they are proxy world government, world armies in terms of NATO. And of course, when you look at the next level, under that structure of world government and all that, then you have the superstate regions that ultimately, eventually answer to the world government. And the European Union, of course, is the most obvious and the most advanced. But they want them in the Americas, they want them in the Australia, Far East area, they want them in the Middle East, they've got one in Africa with the African Union. And these are being largely created in the same way. They say, here's a free trade zone, it's good for jobs, good for the economy, and then they just, step by step, what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, they move towards more and more centralized control. Now, in terms of the European Union, here's a quote from a man called Jean Monnet, Frenchman, you won't be surprised to know, who is still known as the father of Europe, the father of the European project. And this is what he wrote to a friend on April 30th, 1952, day after I was born, 63 years ago. This is what he wrote. Europe's nations should be guided towards the superstate without their people understanding what is happening. This can be accomplished by successive steps, each disguised as having an economic purpose, but which will eventually and irreversibly lead to federation. So that is the game. That has been the game all along. And no one is going to get in the way unless the British people actually get some backbone, stand up and see the light of what's going on. There's no way that Cameron is going to oversee Britain coming out of the European Union when it is such a long-term plan to be part of this whole global structure of fascist control. And here's another thing. Within the European Union, there are planned to be no countries, no sovereign nations. The idea is to break up countries into regions, weak regions, each specializing in different contributions to the European centralized fascist state. Now, they then have the problem in Europe of massive resistance to that, because there is a sense of nationhood among vast numbers of people. They have an identity with their country, with their nation, with the history of that country and that nation, and the last thing they would want is for that country to disappear. So what they're doing is systematically breaking down that sense of nationhood, that sense of unique culture, that sense of national identity. And they're doing it by systematically opening the door to fantastic amounts of immigration. Now, some of that immigration is absolutely justified because you have people made refugees from wars caused by these same people as part of this bigger plan as well. But the door's not just being opened to refugees who deserve our help and deserve our support. They're being opened to as many people as possible. Why? Because they want to pour in other cultures to break down the sense of European national culture. I'm not saying that's right or whether it's wrong in terms of identifying with a culture. I'm saying that's how it is. And that's what they have to deal with. And this is how they're dealing with it. And the reason that Germany has been targeted so massively with such unquestioning support by Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, is because Germany has such a national identity, such a sense of nationhood, that this has to get maximum treatment to break it down. And so you have a village of 102 people in Germany having, 700 odd migrants put in its midst. Of course, very soon that village is no longer German. Now that's not saying, no, it's nothing to do with racism. It's to do with bloody fact. And that fact is connected to this whole agenda of breaking down a sense of nationhood so it can be, countries can be absorbed with the least resistance possible into this structure that's long been planned that I'm talking about. And I'm not just talking about now, it's been in my books for 20 odd years. And the reason Chancellor Merkel, you'd think she'd be resisting it as Chancellor of Germany, saying, oh no, German culture, what's going on? The reason is that she's supporting it and unquestioningly supporting it, because Angela Merkel is an absolute asset of this hidden cabal that's driving this. She has no allegiance to Germany. First and foremost, it's to her masters in the shadows, and same with Cameron. And that is why there's no way in the world that he would even consider having Britain leave the European Union.